Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green. Oh, okay. Howdy, folks. I don't know if you are, I hope that folks are actually hearing and seeing me. I just got an error message, but it looks like we are going green, at least on YouTube. We may be having some trouble with Rumble, but I will start over to say, howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And a reminder that on this program, when we say go green, we mean that in two very related, but also very different ways. The first way, and the most important way, is deep ecology. In other words, we acknowledge, honor, respect the reality that all life is interconnected, and that whatever we do to that web of life as humans, we ultimately do to ourselves. And whether you come at that realization from a hard science perspective, or you come at that recognition from an eco-spiritual perspective, or like me, you say both of those lenses are truthful, accurate ways of understanding reality. The point is, it is real. Our interconnectedness is something we cannot escape. The second way we mean go green on this program, for me at least, is Green Party. I'm a proud and unapologetic member of the Green Party. We don't turn this program into a rah-rah Green Party. I will tell the truth for the Green Party as I see it, our strengths and weaknesses, the pros and cons. I'll start by acknowledging many of the weaknesses, but I also want to point out that one thing that you know about the Green Party is the Green Party does not seek or accept corporate money. The Green Party tells the truth as we see it. And the Green Party has elected literally thousands of people at the local level, even in a system that is designed not just to prevent our success, but literally designed to prevent the existence of a truly alternative political force. So the Green Party has a role to play, but I make no illusions that we can get to the world that I want to live in merely by electoral politics. And that's why I'm so very excited about the program today and our guest today. We'll be bringing Mary Hooks into the conversation. Mary Hooks is a Black lesbian feminist mother and serves as the field secretary for the Movement for Black Lives. Mary is the former co-director of Southerners on New Ground. You may know it as SONG, probably the best named organization I've ever come across. Mary joined SONG as a member in 2009, began organizing with the organization in 2010. Mary grew up in a family that migrated from Mississippi to the Midwest, and her commitment to liberation is rooted in her experiences and the impacts of the war on drugs in her family and in her community. It is my great pleasure to welcome Mary Hooks to Redneck Gone Green. Hey, Mary.
What up? What up? It's so good to be here with you, buddy.
It is good to be with you as well. And, you come on with that incredible smile. Mary, I got to say, I want to let everybody know, I really, I had heard about Mary and Song, but you came across my radar first at the cutting edge work that you were doing with Stop Cop City. I didn't even know that you were rolling with M4BL at the time. I just knew you were a kick-ass organizer trying to stop Cop City, and I wanted to get to know you. I started to get to know you.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to own it. In fact, I got kind of a little movement crush on Mary Hickshaw. She's happily married. I'm happily married. It ain't like that. But I definitely got a movement crush on this woman because she says what she'll do and does what she says, and has a commitment to liberation that I think makes her a perfect guest for July 2nd as we do two things on this program. One, lift up and honor Frederick Douglass and that seminal essay, What to the Slave is July 4th. And then we slip into Movement for Black Lives, Mary, and we talk about both the vision and the policy and platform. How does that sound?
Sounds delicious.
So I do want to circle, really land it, right? That seminal essay for July 4th that Frederick Douglass wrote in 1852, right? And so to put a fine point on it, it was literally delivered as a speech at an
Yeah.
event commemorating the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
In that speech, Douglass highlighted the stark, sobering contradictions between the
Mm-hmm.
ideals of liberty, justice, and equality that are celebrated on Independence Day. And you'll find all through July 4th in the Declaration of Independence.
Oh
But
yeah.
he then lifted up and named the brutal and horrific reality of the enslavement of Africans that was
Mm-hmm.
codified in the supreme law of the land, the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Constitution, and not only law, but in the culture in the United States. And
Yeah.
Mary, that level of truth telling is something
Mm.
that we don't see today in politics.
Right. Right. I think he gives such a profound read, honey, as the girls would say. He gave a read that I think is so delicious, which is why hundreds of years later we're still referencing it. I don't believe there's been a 4th of July in the last 10 years, you know what I mean? And perhaps even longer, of course, but in the last 10 years that I can remember, where there isn't some way in which people are lifting that up, reminding people of how far America has not come.
And I appreciate that, right? Because and to name it, specifically for Black folks, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
again, like it's almost as if we're supposed to say, "Oh, look, like Black folks are not enslaved anymore." Or lynching is not allowed, by the state anymore, as if that's
Mm-hmm.
the damn bar, right? Like
Right.
the reality is that we have to come, like we have to have the same courage that Frederick Douglass said to say,
Mm-hmm.
what time is it?
Yeah.
What is actually happening now? And to
Yeah.
me, Mary, again, if Frederick Douglass were alive today, and I say with candor and some degree of humility, but he would talk about the ecological collapse.
Oh yeah.
He would confront it fearlessly,
Mm-hmm.
courageously. He
Mm-hmm.
would confront the rising fascism. He
Yeah.
would confront the neoliberal agenda of the Democratic Party. Frederick
Mm-hmm.
Douglass was a truth teller, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass would have told the truth about what is actually happening now.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And I think I feel like many people are bursting at the seams, to be able to tell us truth, but also to hear a truth. And someone had asked, "What should our strategy be in 2024 election?" I'm like, "Tell the truth. Tell the truth. The people need honesty. You know what I mean? Whether they agree or not, that's leave that up to them. But folks need a particular truth in these times when everything is so whitewashed with propaganda and talking points and all of that sort of stuff. We actually just need an honest truth telling. You know?
And I'm glad you said that, Mary, because I will actually say, as somebody who's got, I am a redneck. My redneck credentials are impeccable, Mary. Like, I grew up in the rural South. I grew up country. I have a good friend who says, Cobb, you really are country AF, right? And it's
Hmm.
like, I am. Like,
Yeah.
and that means I got cousins who voted for Donald Trump. And
Hmm.
I got to tell you, like, I've got critiques of that, right? But I'm telling you, the cousins that I'm talking to you about, they're not evildoers, right? They would
Yeah.
never burn a cross, right? They're
Yeah.
not that element. We have to be clear that
Hmm.
element is part of the MAGA framework.
Uh huh.
But what gets them as poor, like as white folks, rural white folks, what get them excited about Donald Trump is he's really sticking it to the establishment.
Yeah. Yeah.
They perceive him to be telling a kind of truth that they don't see out of Democrats ever.
Right. 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 I think, and that's what, and I hear some black people say the same thing. And I think Trump scratches a particular itch for some people, a particular, he's willing to name that the gaps, if you will, even if he be lying about it, whatever.
Yeah, right.
But you know what I'm saying? But he's willing to call America on its stuff, you know, and I
Have you
think
seen
people are looking for that.
Have you seen Chappelle does Dave Chappelle's got a beautiful bit where he talks about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton at the
Mm.
in the very first debate back in 2016, right?
Uh-huh.
Uh, and he said Donald Trump said shit that everybody knows is true, but nobody's willing to say it, and that is
Yeah.
like we're both bought and paid for.
Yep.
And Chappelle said, like, nobody can do Chappelle justice, right? Only Chappelle can really do Chappelle.
This is
But
true. This
I'm
is
just
true.
saying, like, when he did, like, folks, if you haven't seen that bit, like, do yourself a favor and just look up Dave Chappelle, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton debate, and watch that little skit, because what Chappelle says is the man was willing to actually say this whole system is rigged, and I should know it because I'm part of it. And
Right.
just like you and me both alike, Hillary, we know because they're both buying it. They're both trying to buy us both off. But the thing
Mm.
is, what he says is, "But I'm a billionaire, so they can't buy me off." Again, he's a grifter, right?
Yeah.
He's a liar, but he's really good at it. That's the thing. So the fact is that even though he's not honest about it, that willingness to say some parts of the truth is what
Mm-hmm.
appeals and in your words
Yeah.
scratches a particular itch.
Yeah. 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 You know what's the saying that a broke clock is right at least once time a day.
Twice a day because it gets the
Twice a
AM
day.
and the
Twice a
PM.
day. You're right. Twice a day. Mm-hmm.
So look at here, Mary. Like I want to make sure like we could do the whole time on Frederick Douglass, but before we get to Movement for Black Lives, one of the things that I want to lift up about that seminal speech is Douglass's continued call to the moral and ethical
Mm-hmm.
responsibility of American people to abolish slavery. In
Yeah.
other words, it was not merely a policy statement. He
Mm-hmm.
was digging deep into what is in the hearts and souls and minds of the American people and
Mm-hmm.
confronting the reality that you know this is wrong and
Mm-hmm.
you have to it is a slavery which was a which side are you on moment.
Oh yeah.
And, again, I think that it's worth pointing out that Frederick Douglass was not calling for a slavery protection act,
Right.
right? He was not
Right.
calling to that, oh, we should, like make sure to have better quarters for the slave
Mm-hmm.
quarters. It
Right.
wasn't like make sure the slaves got better food to eat. It was
Yeah.
literally to abolish the institution in its entirety. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
kind of transformational clarion call that I think we
Mm-hmm.
need today. We have to
Yeah.
confront that the current social, political, and economic institutions are fundamentally racist.
Mm-hmm.
They're fundamentally sexist. They that these huge transnational corporations and the political economy of capitalism is literally destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself. That's the conversation I
Oh yeah.
genuinely believe if any political party were to actually say that and people thought they had a chance to win,
Mm-hmm.
people would flock to that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Without a question. Without a question. I think that people, what's this, what's I'm a backslider, okay, but what the Bible say, without a vision, the people perish. And I think not only do we need folks who can assert a particular vision, um, but also inspire people enough to be able to, with some practical steps in terms of how we make that happen. I think you're right. People want it. People need it. You know, Mother Earth needs it. Mother Earth needs it. And I think that it's very far and few between that we come across those types of people. And oftentimes, me and a buddy was joking the other day. They were like, "Would you run?" I'm like, "Heck no, that is not my assignment. That is not my assignment." And so, what we ultimately started joking around was that folks who, then typically you find it in the grassroots liberation struggle, those type of folks. And because of those type of folks, we also are clear about what what's the monster or the machine actually is. And then, and what we have seen before, folks who, go into the machine with great vision, great plans, great whatever. And if we are outgunned and outnumbered, then that person usually is seen as a disappointment to our people. Uh, and, folks oftentimes relegate the world changing to politicians and elected officials when it's actually on the masses of people to engage that. And without the masses being organized to actually, advance the policy, to hold them accountable, to, you know what I mean? To keep the dog on the leash, then that's when we see so many of our politicians oftentimes betray us or again lack the power to actually be able to move something, you know?
So thank you so much. I want to lift up Dave Petrovich, who is a frequent viewer listener live on Redneck Gone Green, who says, "We, present company excluded, are often our own worst enemy." And I got to
Mm,
say, boy, I wish that didn't ring so damn true. Um,
yeah.
I'm also, Mary, going to take this opportunity to segue from Frederick Douglass to the current moment, and very specifically the movement for Black Lives and the vision and policy platform. First,
Yeah.
the Movement for Black Lives itself is a coalition of organizations that represent Black communities all across the United States. It was launched in 2014, I believe. And I want to give you a moment to actually set the stage for M4BL just a little bit as the field director before we get into what I'm very excited about, both the vision and the policy platform. But I do
Hmm.
want to make sure that we get a moment to really set M4BL.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, 2024 was happening. And many black folks across the country, many of us who were already inside of organizations, were watching and seeing the uprisings, and we're running around putting out fires and also trying to add capacity and support to, everyday people who jumped up off the couch and was like, that collective trigger moment. Yeah. Um, And I remember I got the call from Ashley Henderson from Highlander, who said, "Yo, there's a meeting happening, and folks are scheming on what Black people can be doing together." And essentially said, there is no way in which, with our priorities, making sure we don't leave the South out and to make sure queer and trans folks have leadership in these conversations, that song should not be in the building. Again, song Southerners on New Ground. I believe that was November of 2014. And we weren't M4BL at the time or nothing like that. It was deeply relational in the way in which people were brought to the table, who who's doing what. I think there was certainly the political radical left tendencies that was in the space. Um, and many of us had spent time in Ferguson, went to Ferguson either through our organizations or, as BLM was coming into formation, put in their call out song, we went. Um, uh, as song during that time. But anywho, we came together, and I remember we had a very deep, powerful conversation about what could be possible. And then I think we called the question. We were like, all right, so what should we do now? And I remember someone saying, well, what would Ella Baker do? The student movement happening,
That's
all
a
of
hell
this
of a
other time.
question. I just
What
want
would
to
Ella
say
Baker
that's
do?
a hell of a question. What would Ella
Yep.
Baker do?
And she brought people
I'm going
together.
to I'm going to stop you for a moment
Uh
because
huh.
that very question deserves, like, who is Ella Baker and why do you
Mm.
both and I get so excited whenever you ask, what would Ella Baker do?
Yes, Ella Baker, organizer through and through, served many roles inside of some of the traditional civil rights organizations, like NAACP, like the SCH. I'm going to say SCHR, a current organization. Um, and she was the one who essentially organized the young people who was engaged in the sit-in movement to come together and determine essentially how do we keep y'all radical but yet get y'all organized and organization before these sellout black organizations. Some of them were still a little radical at the time, whatevs, but before they get to you all and water down what it is y'all are trying to do. And she was known for some of the work that she came based in New York, but did a lot of work in the South, as particularly in the Delta, um, to build up the organizing infrastructure of relationships and teaching folks how to organize, especially uh, local Black people, not to see her as a leader, but to see and understand themselves as leaders. And just I think some people call her the mother of the movement, a godmother of the civil rights movement, but she has had her hand in so much work. What did she pass in the, was that the 90s?
Hmm.
Did she pass in the 90s? Um, yeah, did some work around cooperatives. I mean, she had her hand in all different uh, types of experiments, I would say. But her organizing methodology, I think, is what many people look at, study, and I believe that she also would speak about and use language that talked about transformative organizing and organizing that transforms us and our communities, and that being essential to how, organizers do what we do.
And one of the things that I want to lift up, first of all, if Ella Baker was not a woman, she would be famous, like, or more famous than
Oh
she
yeah.
is, except for, in radical left spaces. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but the other thing I want to lift up is that some of the debates that she had that were chronicled with Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and others of the movement,
Mm-hmm.
and the famous quote that she said. Uh, Martin, strong people don't need such
Yeah.
strong leaders.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, that is something that I always remind myself. Like, what we need is genuine feminist leaders, right?
Yeah.
We need collective liberation where we
Mm-hmm.
are also collectively leading together, right?
Yeah.
And so, to me, the moment you say, "What would Ella Baker do?" Like, the reason I get excited is because it reminds me, all right, David, what would Ella
Mm-hmm.
Baker do? One
Yeah.
thing that she would always then say is, like, right, who is the oppressed? Who is actually, like, catching hell right now?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the folks that we need to be listening to.
Yeah.
Again, there's a space for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
because, and not because we're checking boxes, but because all of us, like, have a lived experience with something to
Yeah.
offer,
Yeah.
but many of us have blind spots, right? And I'll just say,
Mm-hmm.
I know, like, I grew up in poverty, so and I grew up with a certain perspective, but the very body that I inhabit means
Mm-hmm.
that I've got some blind spots. And
Yeah.
so, Mary, this is the thing: I need you to be able, so that if I'm making some mistakes, like I like to
Mm-hmm.
say all the time, if I'm making a mistake, I ain't doing it on purpose, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And so, when you're in a society that is as clever as this
Hmm.
capitalist racist society, that it can confuse us, right?
Yeah.
So we need each other. And that's
Yeah.
the other thing that Ella Baker, really understood, is that all of our liberation is ultimately wrapped up in one another.
Hmm. Yeah, which I also think speaks to a lot of what you just named about her values, are some of the core tenets of Black feminisms, particularly Black queer feminisms, because there's a lot of tendencies. Some of them are like smell like capitalism, smell still, got some carceral stuff happening. But Black queer feminisms, certainly, her politic and her praxis of her politic is embodied in that ideology.
There's no doubt about it. I'm reminded of the Combahee River Collective statement, right?
Hmm.
That is, again, comes out of explicitly Black queer feminism, and it's just a crystal clear, uh, like, clarity. I don't know how else
Yeah.
to say it, but, like, the incision that capitalism and settler colonialism and
Hmm.
heteropatriarchy and white
Yeah.
supremacy, it is all inherently power over. It is
Yeah.
all inherently dominator. It is all inherently extractive and oppressive,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like, and so Black capitalism ain't going to save Black people, right?
Period.
And rainbow capitalism ain't going to save queer people. Like, I can go down the list, right? Like,
Right.
there is a certain, frankly, there is a level of liberation for me
Hmm.
that actually comes
Hmm.
of saying, just cut the Gordian knot. Like, what we need is a power with regenerative
Yeah.
political economy that centers land, that centers human beings, or even centers human beings, but puts human beings in its appropriate
Yeah.
place within the cosmology of life itself.
Yeah.
And if we, like, when we get to that, everybody is not only free, but everybody is in right reciprocal relationship.
Yes. Yep. 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 Yep.
So, but
Exactly.
of course, we can't just wish our way into that, right?
Mm-mm.
But I will say that that kind of vision is what I see in the movement for Black Lives, right? And
Mm.
so I interrupted you just because I couldn't help it because you mentioned Ella Baker, and I felt like I just jumped on it, right? But I
Yeah.
would go back. What would Ella Baker do? Y'all ask yourselves. Well, what
Hmm.
y'all ended up with is a vision statement for the movement for Black Lives.
Yeah, yeah. We brought people together very much the way she did at Shaw, brought people together. That was Cleveland, July 2015. And then we spent a little bit over a year building out this vision for Black Lives policy platform, engaging local organizations who were fighting on these different planks to make sure that our analysis and our intersectional analysis was clear, and even still, we had gaps. Like we're actually going through another drafting part, another draft of this, always sharpening based on the conjunctural analysis, right? And so, um, yeah, this policy platform, we released it in August of 2016, and I think what we didn't have was the plan on how we get there, but we knew we had at least a vision and a policy platform, and that assignment to build that came out of that um, July convening. I remember literally we were in a big room with all these organizers and big paper all over, and people like, "What are you working on? What's your fight? What's your struggle? What are you seeing that can lift a burden? What do you see that can change material conditions? What do you think are the things that folks on the ground in your community that you organizing with, want to see happen?" And initially, and when folks, as we're writing all of this, and we're like, what is the sort of container this must live in, all this information? And folks said, I remember folks was like, we need something like a black ALEC, the Legislative Exchange Committee.
American Legislative
Yeah,
Exchange Committee.
yeah. And we're like, okay, hear you. And what ultimately evolved was the policy platform, and we've been able to get hundreds of people. I haven't looked at it. The back end. That ain't what I don't get. I don't see the back end, but easily hundreds, probably thousands. Let me not be modest. Thousands have signed up in support of that vision, including organizations, individuals, um, other types of folks, who, like a Corey Bush, for example, have signed on to the platform. And so, yeah, and I know that there are others, folks in the Green Party have signed on to it. And so I think, yeah, that people see it as, and especially usually when people are hitting us up around this, people are like, we're starting a campaign, or we've been in rapid response mode, and now we want to actually, come with some demands. We want to actually be able to make demands of the folks who are, got the boot on their neck. And so we, from the Vision for Black Lives, also we started a policy table inside of the movement for Black Lives to then be able to say, now, how do we get some of this passed? And then what are the, how do we, what are the political conditions we need in order for this to advance? And we said, well, we need an organizing table, because you can't move policy if you ain't got nobody moving on the ground, period, point blank. And so that's where we made a specific invitation to base building organizations, who are trying to think about scale and to grow, and who are moving local campaigns, to be in dialogue with one another. We were like, where can we test the ability for this to move on a state level, right? We were getting some local wins. I think for the stuff that, uh, was that 2016, 17, all of that was, huge rapid response years, a lot of Black death, a lot of, Black folks trying to come up with some immediate solutions to why police are murdering people. Um, and and so, yeah, some of it, I think, certainly gave folks some direction around what could be possible, and also to help draw a line, right, around what it is that we were saying we were calling for. There were some things that we knew just based on our own lives that we couldn't, in our integrity, you know what I mean, call for, you know what I mean, as Miriam Kaba gave us language, you know, the non-reformers reform. Like, we could not create a situation where we will have to untangle this crap later on, you know what I mean, and looking at history, and particularly in the 90s, where again I locate myself and the war on drugs and all the things. So I'm like, there were many black politicians who was like, yes, three strikes, the crime bill, we need that. And then we're like, you know, generations later, like, what were y'all thinking? Right. And so that was also part of our position, to move it as far left as possible and not be limited by what our current political circumstances are, and clear that in order for us to create the conditions by whereby these things can move, that we needed an M for BL. We needed all black organizations with a radical left politic to be advancing. We also needed to stand up the rising majority, which is our black and brown led, multiracial, cross sectoral coalition space, right? In order to advance that. And so, yeah, that's some of the ways in which I think we have situated ourselves. And oh, I named the statewide stuff. I think it's important to name that. We ended up getting the Breathe Act, which was an extension of the Vision for Black Lives policy platform that advanced in 2020. And it was kind of like this omnibus bill around all these people are in the streets. This is it. You know, actually, they knew exactly what we were demanding. Let's be clear about it. And so what we just did was say, okay, y'all can't eat the whole pie now because we've had it here for since 2016. Let's give you a slice of this, the Breathe Act. And then they, of course, come with the George Floyd Act that wouldn't have even saved George Floyd's life. But we're able to get a statewide Breathe Act passed in Illinois. I think is super important. And all of this is because many organizations have called the question, what can we do together that we cannot do alone? And are willing to do what it takes and do what needs to be done in order to do shared work together, while also, you know, playing and staying in our lanes and converging together as the, you know, as the strategy and political moment calls for it.
Well, Mary Hooks, that was so much. I'll take this opportunity to remind folks that you are watching and or listening to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I'm speaking with Mary Hooks. Mary is the field director for Movement for Black Lives. And right now, we're talking about the Movement for Black Lives vision and policy platform. And if you're watching us live, then you know in the comments section, I've dropped into the comments the 6 core demands that comes out of that policy platform. 1, end the war on Black people. 2, reparations. 3, invest, divest. 4, economic justice, community control. And lastly, political power. And what, for me, what really was a clarion call is those 6 demands collectively represent an outline for a transformative agenda for achieving true justice and equality. It literally is a policy, they're policy platforms that taken together literally lift up and would be worthy of either Ella Baker or Frederick Douglass, right? It's like, this is actually what it's going to take. And so I do want to also lift up Jacqueline, who is also a frequent listener. I was going to go them one at a time, but I want to lift up Jackie, who asked, what does the invest divest demand stand for in that list? And Mary, I think Jackie's asking a very good question. We're going to do this on each one of them, but we're going to go invest divest first. Hit it.
Yeah. So it's a framework that essentially, you know, should have all of us questioning, and particularly for Black people, but all of us should be questioning, what are the harmful systems and institutions that need to be divested from? And what are the things that bring regenerative economy, that puts us in right relationship with Mother Earth, that educates our children, you know what I mean, that ensures the human rights of people are being met through housing, through, you know, food, et cetera, et cetera. What are those things we need to invest in? Even more specifically in this moment, you know, as folks have been calling, you know, defund police. When we called for defunding of police in 20, the divest invest is a polite way of saying that. You know, I think it lays a little bit better on the palate to some people. But I think at the heart of it is like, we've seen the divestment happen from many institutions, particularly whether it be public education, what have you, over years, right? Mental health resources, the social safety net under neoliberalism, that's been their jam. And so
Yep.
what we're saying is actually you need to be investing in the things that actually make our communities whole, And here we're struggling around Cop City here in Atlanta, and our city has spent $106 million of taxpayer money, when we have said actually it is very clear what this community needs in order to bring about true safety, not the stuff that they say the police can give us, but true safety can be found if you invest in these things. It's a public health matter. CDC said. I mean, I could go on and on. So yes, that's
So
what that
Mary,
means.
yeah, it is, and that's a brilliant answer, Jackie, and anybody who's again either watching live or watching the video part. If you're doing a podcast, you got to go to M4BL's policy platform and read it yourself. But I will read it out loud. Invest Divest, as currently articulated, is this demand calls for the reallocation of resources from policing and incarceration to community-based initiatives that promote safety and well-being. M4BL advocates for substantial investments in education, healthcare, and employment opportunities for
Mm-hmm.
Black communities. So one of the things that I want to say is lift that up. I want to both give it the roses and also the loving, constructive critique that I want to offer to it. The
Mm-hmm.
first thing is to acknowledge that very frequently, Mary, I don't know about you, but I would get people who say, well, what, defund the police, then what would it look like, et cetera. Like, oh my God, how are we going to have safety? And my answer is always, you know what it would look like? Any affluent suburban neighborhood. That's what it would look
Period.
like. How many damn cops do you see, if you go into an affluent suburban neighborhood? Answer, you
Yeah.
don't. Right? Like
Correct.
that's the bottom line. Like, so that's what it would look like if we were actually funding all
Yeah.
communities at the level that we're actually there. So again, the roses at Invest Divest. I love the framing. I think it is correct. The part that I urge y'all to really be thinking about is
Mm-hmm.
community ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just opportunities, but ultimately the community needs to be owning the land. It needs to be owning the programs. It's not enough to simply say, oh, we'll provide employment opportunities within Black communities. Like, that is a necessary but not sufficient condition for liberation. We, the people, need to own our own communities, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so to me, this is again truth telling, right?
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
this is to
Yep.
offer, and I hope I trust,
I
Mary, that
think
it'll
that's
be
good.
received in the spirit
Yeah.
in which
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
offering it. It's like,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
do we,
Yeah.
steel sharpen steel, right? How are we going
Yep.
to actually get what we really need?
Yep. Yep. I think that's delicious. I took a note, and I will make sure I send it to our policy table comrades who are moving the process to continue to update this. So thank you for that.
Well, I am honored. And by the way, I feel obliged to lift up Jackie, who also writes in the comments section. These demands are brilliant, by the way, she
Mm,
says, which I completely agree with. And I'm
right
going to
on.
now go back to the very first one, which is in the war on Black people. And Mary, I'm going to let the words speak for themselves and then get you to react to it, right?
Yeah.
So, again, for the folks on the podcast who are just listening after the fact, here is how M4BL talks about ending the war on Black people. Quote, this demand calls for an end to state-sanctioned violence and criminalization of Black communities. It seeks the abolition of the death penalty, the end of cash bail, and the demilitarization of police forces.
Yeah.
M4BL advocates for policies that protect and affirm Black lives and hold law enforcement accountable for misconduct. I mean, again, to me, that's a level of clarity. It suggests very clearly the policies. It doesn't say exactly how you have to implement them, but it is clear, it is unequivocal that there is a war on Black people happening in this society, and it needs to end. Period. Full stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the way in which, MFBL has approached this particular demand, as I named before, the Breathe Act being an extension of the divest invest. You'll see also divest language used in this particular demand as well. But I think we've also seen it with like our movement comrades, oh, who have done and do work around the two, was it the 10, was it the militarization, the police getting military equipment. I forget the 1099 program. When I believe Obama was still in office, when folks began to, that became more popular and people's understanding about how, in fact, local police departments were getting this sort of um, military equipment. And I would say, for the popular movement that grew out of Ferguson, I think that we've seen people, and we've seen this not only in situations like that, but I think also around this Cop City, we know, and I keep going back to it because I'm like, y'all, it is very crystal clear that this is a problem not just for Atlanta, but if folks have not seen it, it's about 69. Actually, Renee Johnson just said that she's been continuing to update her research. Like there's 74 cop cities and so there is one in practically every state, 47 states, and we know that cop,
It's their
yeah,
plan, Mary. Let's be
oh yeah,
very like let's be truth tellers. Like
oh
they
yeah,
have a plan for
oh
us,
yes,
right?
there is a
And
plan.
folks, make no mistake about it. White skin privilege is absolutely real, and it will not protect you from what is coming, right?
Facts.
Like there is there like we have to understand that black folks in this society are the canary in the coal mine. Like
Mm-hmm.
and I should tell Mary all, like if any white person thinks that because of the white skin privilege that they absolutely have in this society, if they think that really means anything to the predatory class or the ruling class, here's
Right.
a little experiment. Why don't you go find a country club, knock on the door and say, I ain't got no money, but I'm white. Can I come swim in the pool? And you see how they treat you.
Yes, honey. That's a great way to support a class analysis. That's that that's really good. I'm about to think about that once more. Yeah, and so yeah, the Cop City is certainly a plan, and a lot of these police departments are also police departments who have trained with the IDF, with the Israeli Defense Force, and have programs in which that is happening. And now, Cop City, many have said is being modeled after Little Gaza, which is the same sort of mock city training apparatus that the Israeli Defense Force trains at to commit then the genocide that's happening there, and then the police learn those tactics, come
and
here,
and
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 then
deploy them here.
oh
Like, let's
yeah,
be clear.
I'm like, did you see what they did to you, to the babies at the encampments? Did you see what they were doing? And which is typically a turning point when the young people, particularly young white people in this country, what I mean, get the smoke of the police force. Usually, people are like, whoa. And I think that part of their plan over particularly the last 10 years, the state's plan has been also to demonize organizing, to demonize, and many folks allowed it to happen, especially when black people's out there. They're like, no, these black folks shouldn't be out here, and they allowed that to happen. And so and then now these, and not saying that young white people have not been up and through this, let me be clear, but I think there was certainly something to be said about when the college students begin to take militant action against the police, and the story that folks already have and perception that they have of these young people who, if this was the 60s, 70s, would be seen as heroes in a lot of ways. And not saying that people weren't, like going off against the hippies and things of that nature, but we knew what happened when the young people mobilized to the South during Freedom Summer, young white people, and how that woke up the consciousness of even their parents. And so I think that we're in a moment right now where I think some people have normalized the way in which the police have engaged us. Rather, here in the Stop Cop City fight, the last November when we did the Block Cop City action, they had the dogs out, they had the tanks out, they had the rubber bullets out, they had the tear gas out. I mean, all
And,
manner
and
of.
let's just be clear, that was all against peaceful
Oh yeah.
protesters, people who were exercising constitutionally protected First Amendment rights,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody who was in charge knew full good and well
Oh yeah.
what they were doing and what the protesters were about. They murdered Tortuga, uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh,
Tortuguita. Yeah.
and again, like I think it's important that we have the courage to
Mm-hmm.
recognize that it's not as if that we are living in a system where if we just get organized and are good enough and kind enough that we
Mm-hmm.
can love our way into this. We got to love on each other.
Yes.
We got to
Yeah.
hold on to each other. But we also have
Yeah.
to have an understanding that the system itself is the problem, right? And
Mhm.
that we alone are not going to be able within this system to get to liberation.
Yeah. Yeah. And love each other enough to take bold and courageous acts with one another, to tell the truth the way in which Frederick Douglass spoke the truth, to, speak it in the way that you speak the truth, but either way, speak it. And what I also say about this, the ending the war on Black people, part of it, and I talked about it as it relates through to the resistance movement that happens, right? But I'm also speaking to the way in which they show up to everyday Black people who are not on the front lines of movement, the way they are executing warrants, the way in which they are kicking down doors, the way in which they shot baby Boo Boo because they were letting off a one of those little grenade things and almost blew the baby's face off. You know what I mean? The way in which Breonna Taylor was slaughtered, the way in which Rayshard Brooks at a Wendy's, literally down the street from my house, was slain. So I think, the way in which they activate and move every day, they don't just put on the clown suits for when the mass protests are in the streets. And I'm talking about, and it's not just it's that, but it's also the deep surveillance here in Atlanta right now. They've put out a report that they're Tektronix, I believe is the name of this company, and they're testing out a new form of the ankle monitor, where essentially, as someone explained it, using AI, using all of this GPS, whatever, that's not really my jam. But what they was sharing with me is like, not only will they be monitoring the person, but they're monitoring the community in which they are a part of. So the surveillance apparatus and network connected to one person, everybody gets, essentially tracked. And that's just one example of the hyper surveillance. And not all the ring cameras. So I'm like, everybody divest from ring cameras. Don't share your footage with the police. But that's part of how they've built out. And so to me, I'm like, that's a campaign we could win if folks would just realize, if you're gonna be recording people, why you gotta share with the police, yo? Why you gotta share
And
with
I
the
got to tell you,
police?
this is one that black, brown, white, like the whole rainbow coalition,
Oh
very
yeah.
clearly can understand that
Hmm.
surveillance and what that means. And
It's a cultural shift.
it is culture.
Yeah.
And speaking of cultural shifts, I do want to make sure that we get to reparations because I
Oh
think
yeah.
this is critically important.
Ooh, yeah.
And I'm going to again let the words speak for themselves and then
Mm,
get you to riff on it. Movement
yeah.
for Black Lives demands reparations for past and ongoing harms suffered by Black people due to slavery, segregation, and systemic discrimination. This includes economic compensation as well as investments in education, healthcare, and housing to address racial disparities.
Hmm.
Mary?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think we couldn't write that with the integrity that one would need to have in order to continue to make this demand. And I think a big part of that is because there's a legacy and body of work. There's a legacy and body of work that I think has been super important to many of our political development around what is clearly owed to Black people, not just here in the U.S., but across the diaspora. We know that reparations for us is it doesn't just stop there, right? As a Pan Africanist, I understand this, and we know this to be true. And I think that you know, this is an interesting time because we're seeing folks locally push, and there's a lot of reparations committees and study groups emerging locally on both city and county levels. Um, and we're seeing some of the backlash of that as well. where as we're seeing the conservative right wing cats begin to they just try to take down the black woman who started a foundation to give money to black women for like small business owners or something, and they and believe one of the courts held it up that it was discriminatory and left people out. Oh my God, the thought of that just blows my mind. Um, and so, yeah, this demand around reparations, part of it is one being able to advance the House bill that John Conyers wrote. H was a House Bill 40, which I understand is on Biden's desk right now. Real talk. Um, but I think where we have, and I just want to name this, this is not a shared opinion, but I think people have the way in which people understand it and enter into the reparations discussion, absence of the historical legacy and the collective understanding that we're calling for a reparations for a people, not an individual, for a
Right.
people, right? I think it's super important. Else we see reparations being watered down like, hey, send me $30 for movie tickets, reparations, hashtag reparation. Like, no, so disrespectful in my opinion, and a very capitalist way to view it. But I think that there is something to be done to advance reparations on an institutional level. And I see you, David, but I just want to name this because it's yes, it's the U.S. government, but there were also institutions who deeply, benefited, profited off of, the Catholic Church being one of them. Yeah, the Catholic Church being one of them. And so I think there are other major institutions that wield a lot of power that also owe a debt to Black people and Indigenous people.
And I'm so glad you said it because I am remembering, again, I'm 61 years old, right? So much of my consciousness began during the anti-apartheid movement,
Mm,
where because like I still remember the first time I saw the big end apartheid now at the University of Houston. I had worked in construction for a couple of years and then junior college, so I was not a typical university student at the University of Houston. But when I saw that
mhm,
sign, I was like, oh hell, I know what apartheid is. I'd like to help end it. Like,
mhm.
that like, and then underneath it, Mary, underneath that big old sign, there was a table and a human being behind it. An activist. I ain't even joking, Mary. I don't know about you, but that was literally the first time I was in my like early, maybe even mid 20s by then. That was the first time I'd
Mhm.
ever laid eyes on a
Yeah,
activist, like
yeah,
somebody who did that, right? And
yep.
I remember hustling right over there, right? And I was like, I was kind of excited about it. But what I also remember is I got into what I now realize is a political struggle
Mm,
with the fellow behind the table because he was telling me that, like, and I got kind of confused because he was trying to explain to me how I was inadvertently supporting apartheid because I was a student paying tuition at the University of Houston, and something called a board of regents were making decisions about all this money investing into
mhm,
corporations doing business in South Africa. And like it was kind of making my head swim. But what really got me and what got us into where at first the loggerheads was that dude had the audacity to tell me the US government supported apartheid. And Mary, I'm not proud of myself because
mhm,
I still remember though saying something like, man, where did you go to school? This is America. We stand for liberty, justice, and equality, right? I know, right? Here's the
oh,
thing. That
yeah,
fella did not humiliate me. He
yeah.
didn't fuss at me. He
Mhm,
literally said, looky here, man, I got all this material on this table. I don't think anything I say or any of this material is actually going to help, but I'll make a deal with you. If you go to the MD Anderson Library, that was the main library on campus. He
mhm,
said it's 100 feet away, and if you just read U.S. News and World Report or Business Week or Time Magazine, because it was the height of the apartheid movement, right? He said
mhm,
just read a cover story or two, right? And you
mhm.
tell me what you want me to read, right? And I'll read it. And then you and I can have a conversation where we actually like really try to understand our various perspectives, right?
Yeah,
And Mary,
yeah.
I tell that story obviously on myself, right? Because clearly he was right.
Mhm.
I didn't know what I didn't know,
Yeah.
but he took me where I was and invited me into a level of dialogue. Now, at the end of the semester, I was on the
Mhm.
other side of that table with him and others, right? In other
Yeah.
words, I always remember the importance of what that fella showed me and what Malcolm X said, which was don't laugh at somebody or make fun of them or think poorly of them for thinking how
Yeah.
they think or acting like they act. Remember,
Yeah.
you didn't always act like you act and think like you
Fact.
think, right? You have to
Fact.
take people where they are.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get it to reparations because I remember in that process of anti apartheid work, it led me to Conyers and the Reparations Act. And I also
Mm-hmm.
remember how disempowering it felt when the
Mm-hmm.
whole like call to action was merely call your congressperson to support
Yeah.
Conyers' bill to just study reparations. When I
Yeah.
knew who my congressperson was, and there was no way in hell that he was ever going to do it. And so to me, that alone, like, yes, it's like, yes, that, but how can we go
Oh yeah.
bigger and broader? And that's again what I appreciate about the M4BL approach is yes to reparations and yes to government, but also to targeting the corporations and other
Yep.
institutions. And
Yep.
also, we don't have to wait, right? Like we could
Facts.
do it ourselves. We could
Yeah.
do it together. There are ways to actually get there that I think is what the M4BL messaging, like we have to actually talk about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not just a pie in the sky kind of way. We have
Yeah.
to be willing to confront the legacy to the entire diaspora, as you've just described,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
also to recognize that everybody's liberation is actually tied up here. Like
Yeah. Oh
it's not,
yeah.
and it's not some kind of crazy black capitalist like just pay folks off. I mean,
No.
look at the Japanese internment camps, right? Reparations were given there.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are ways to look at this that go far deeper than merely lobby Congress.
Yep. Right
So
on.
I again, I appreciate the clarity of the call and also the recognition that there's not one right way to be able to implement the
Yeah.
M4BL program, nor is any of the individual policy statements.
Yeah. Right on.
So I also, again, like we're running out of time, Mary. So I
Oh
do want
no.
to hit the economic justice part and then ask if you'll come back on another time because I don't feel like we have done that. We don't have time to do justice to all of them. We hit
Right
invest,
now.
divest. I do want to make sure that we catch economic justice because this is one that really speaks to me. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I'll let the words. I'll just read the words and get you to riff. Movement for Black Lives seeks to address economic inequality by promoting policies that ensure fair wages, worker protections, and access to quality jobs. This includes advocating for a living wage, affordable housing, and economic support for Black-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we've seen this manifest also in really beautiful ways. There are different folks in the ecosystem, for example, Equity and Transformation, based out of Chicago, who uh, took this pillar and have been running with it, along with the reparations piece. But for example, the way we've seen this shown up is that folks have been able on a local level to be able to organize to get a uh, guaranteed income. Mostly, many of them are pilots, but many of them are also, we're seeing like in Chicago, uh, Mayor Brandon has committed local monies from the from the local pot to be able to give to this, so it isn't just finding grants and organizational support to stand up something like that, but that was led by formerly incarcerated people. So it was a sweet it was a sweet um, combining of of those who are directly impacted by this, those who have been shut out due to mass incarceration and the war on Black people, those who who have also experiencing exploitation in the economy. And so I think that with this one here, it's always interesting because inside of M4BL, I think that if you probably surveyed many of us, we would say that we're socialists. Many would say certainly anti-capitalist, like that's the starting spot. Now, in terms of like the what are we for, I would say a great majority of us would say we have socialist tendencies, and many would say communist tendencies. But I think all in all, what people are clear about um, is that what we have does not work and will not serve us, and that if the ways in which humans must support ourselves and live in a world together, we have to figure out a way to do that that is not exploiting the land and one another. And at the heart of that is also like there is no lack in the world. There is no lack, and that we have enough, and we need the proper governance systems, economic system, etc., in order that can actually get us there. And I think in real time, and in the moment, what we also clear about is like, there are some ways in which the economic hardships that people are struggling with day to day until we build the thing. It's irresponsible to tear down a thing unless you build something else. People are like, a fair wage, an honest wage. You know what I mean? Like some of these things, and as we were talking earlier, now I'm clocking the time. But what is interesting is that we're not just asking for fair wage for Black people. We're naming it as part of this caucus of people. But when we're calling for that, it's not just for Black people. It is for all exploited people. And I think that is where, when you talk about this being, this isn't just a North Star for us. Anybody else who wants, and sees themselves as, if you took off Black, but you should be able to see yourself in it, whatever. But I think there's a path to freedom for everybody, on this.
And, again, we've run out of time. So I'm going to ask you, Mary, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you publicly in front of all these folks. Will you come back at some point so we can continue this conversation?
Oh yes, would love to chop it up with you some more, buddy.
Here's the thing. I'm going to wrap up this program by pointing something out. Mary used the term non-reformist reforms earlier. And folks have heard me use that term as well. And I want to remind you, it's not the policy that makes it either reformist or non-reformist, right? The point is, non-reformist reforms as a framework says, what can we win today, right? But it doesn't just say we want to win the reform and be done with it. What makes something a non-reformist reform is a strategic transformational plan. It's not dogmatically, but it says we are undermining white supremacy and we are undermining capitalism. We are undermining the logic of these power over dominator systems. And so it's not the policy, it is whether that policy is part of a larger framework. I mean, one of the trick questions, and I'll be right up front about it because it is a trick question when I say, are feeding hungry school children just merely a reform, or is it a non-reformist reform? What makes it a trick question is it depends, right? Because when the Black Panthers did it, that shit was revolutionary because it was hardwired within political education. It was hardwired with a whole transformational understanding of the world. And it's worth pointing out that that's exactly why the government literally took that policy, depoliticized it, and then merely fed hungry children. Now, who's going to criticize feeding hungry children? Nobody. But when you just do it and depoliticize it, it is at best weak-ass charity, right? It is not transformational. And that's what I love about the movement for Black Lives. Its vision, its policy statement, it is hardwired to be non-reformist. It is like we are pushing for all of these things within a context of liberation and transformation. And that's what, to me, gets me so excited about figuring out how can I properly relate to M4BL as a self-proclaimed revolutionary, as somebody who wants to be part of restructuring society, because I'm like, I see M4BL, and those are people I want to be relating to in the appropriate way.
Let's right on.
All right. Well, folks, I want to thank you all for joining Redneck Gone Green. Of course, I want to thank Mary Hooks of Movement for Black Lives, the field director. I want to thank you, the listener viewer of Redneck Gone Green. I want to remind you that what happens here every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, is what we say are unsanctioned conversations. We have the conversations that the ruling elite and the predatory
Conversation.
class say we are not supposed to have, and we are going to have them. And we're going to
Mm.
build the movement for peace, for love, for justice and compassion. And it's
Yeah.
going to be all of us. And it is in
Mhm.
that spirit that I am very happy to invite you to join us next week when we'll have Rabbi Bob Rotenberg and Gabby Kirk talking about anti Semitism versus criticizing Israel. And
Mm.
where can we find the common ground that is necessary to
Yeah.
continue to build together as we confront the reality of rising fascism, the
Mhm.
reality of ecological collapse? Folks, we got ain't nobody coming to save us, right? It's going to be us, and it's going to take all of us.
Yeah. What
Much
a
love to you,
close.
Mary. Much love to everybody
Mm.
else. Peace.
Very compelling. Peace.
Bye bye.